Hi everyone, sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. Apparently today is a big Windows update day that I did not know about. So my computer started updating and it shut down. So I apologize, and we will just go right to the reading passages and then start talking about some math. So for passage 3, this is a humanities passage, and we talked about humanities being arts, poetry, sculpture, things like that. Not just a physical art, but also, works of art, poetry, literature, historical art, that sort of thing. So again, a little more technical maybe than some of the other passages that you might come across on the ACT, but everything that you will need to know will be right in these passages, like I said before. So if you don't know anything about humanities, don't worry, it's all right here. So this passage here talks about female poets. So if you like female poets, you're in luck. If not, hopefully you didn't find this too boring. So we will start talking about question 1. Which of the following most fully lists solutions considered by the author to the problem that the list of beloved women poets is not nearly as long as the list of beloved men poets? And the answer is B. Reappraising the literary canon, adding new women's names to the list, weighing the importance of some male poets, and reading work by women as yet not widely read. So these are all things that she talks about, or the author talks about in the passage, things that we can do to get more women poets recognized in the poetry world. Um, she never says anything about rejecting writing of those whose names contain double W's. We can definitely eliminate A. She never says anything about um, creating a world in which women will flourish. I mean, she talks about women poets, but she doesn't really go into that. So we can eliminate C. And as far as D goes, promoting the best work of current women writers, rediscovering old writers, reappraising Matthew Arnold's view of criticism. She doesn't really talk about looking at criticism, so we can eliminate that one. Okay, question 2 asks, which of the following sentences best summarizes the first paragraph? And the answer for number 2 is J. If we admit that there are not enough quality poetry written by women, it can make it easier to discover why this is so and help us change the situation. So she really does say we have to admit that there's a problem in the world of poetry for women, and then we can go from there. So we need to look at the problem and admit that there is a problem and then go from there. So let me scroll down here for you guys. Okay, question 3. It may reasonably be inferred from lines 10 through 17 that James Merrill respected Elizabeth Bishop's poetry. So we're talking about an inference. So this is something that's maybe not written blatantly out there. You kind of look between the, read between the lines, as your teacher would say, and dig a little deeper. So the answer is there, but we might just have to kind of come up with it ourselves. It's not right there in writing. So the answer for number 3 is A. He respected her poetry and wished that reaction to her poems had not been complicated by gender issues. So if you look at lines 10 through 17, he says, he called her one of the 4 best women poets ever, which can hardly have pleased Miss Bishop, who kept her work from appearing in women's anthologies. Better from her point of view to be one of the 40 or 40,000 best poets and have it done with. He says, if I raise the issue at all, it's to disassociate her from these shop-worn polarities. So she's saying, I don't want to be considered a woman poet. I want to be considered a poet. That was more important to her. So he just wished it hadn't been complicated by gender issues, that she just wants people to look at her as a poet, not a woman, not a woman poet, a poet. Let's see, question 4. According to the third paragraph, lines 25 through 39, Emily Dickinson's career was helped by Helen Hunt Jackson, who, so this is one of those, probably a detail question. It's going to tell you exactly what she did in this passage, which it does, and the answer is G. encouraged her, Mabel Loomis Todd, who transcribed her work using a bizarre machine, and Lavinia Dickinson, who rescued her work from oblivion. So it tells us in that passage, in that paragraph, all the things that those three women did. Okay, it tells her Helen Hunt Jackson encouraged her. It tells that Mabel Loomis Todd transcribed her work, and her sister found her work and rescued it from oblivion. So that's kind of a straight details question right out of the passage. Tells us what those three women did, and that's the answer. Okay, question 5 here. So which of the following most clearly distinguishes between the two ways suggested by the author's assertion that we can't have it both ways, lines 54. So, so the two ways, when they say we can't have it both ways, what two ways are they talking about? And the answer here is number C. Women haven't written as well as men because they have not had the same educational opportunities, yet there are many great women writers no one reads. So if we look at that, line 54, and we talk about we nonetheless have to settle for discoveries less dramatic. We can't expect them to appear with frequency. So those are the two ways that the author is talking about. We can't have it both ways. And those two ways are they haven't had the same educational opportunities, but there are still many great readers that women readers that no one reads. So the answer there would be answer C. Number 6 asks, the author feels that all this rating and counting and classifying of authors, lines 61 through 62 is. So this is something that the author is feeling. We talked about the author's point of view, the author's ideas. So this is something here where they're asking us about the authors. So the answer to number 6 is F. An example of giving into competitive approach to literature, which the author feels is counterproductive. So if we look at lines 61 and 62, what is all this rating and counting and classifying of authors about anyway? If we set up one writer against another, aren't we giving in to what some feminists tell us is, you know, an adversarial and patriarchal culture? So they're saying when you set these authors up against each other, you're creating an environment that's not good for writers, basically. So the answer there would be F. A competitive approach, which is counterproductive. So there you kind of have to say, okay, what is the author saying in that? You know, let's really look at what the author, you know, this is the author's opinion. And again, we talked about you want to write, you want to answer the questions based on what the author is thinking, not what you're thinking. So you might think, oh, it's great to be competitive and that produces better writers, but it's actually more important to the author that there is not a competitive environment for writers, and that's what the question's asking. So question 7 asks, which of the following best states the author's response to Matthew Arnold's view of the function of criticism, lines 65 through 76. So again, the author's response to this critic's view, or this author's view of criticism. So the answer for 7 is C. It makes her wonder who decides what is good, yet she knows most readers think they know what is good poetry and they don't have time to read bad poetry. So if we look at this, line 65 through 76, we may think of Matthew Arnold's view of function of criticism to learn and propagate the best that is known in thought and squirm in our chairs. Who's to say what is best? Who's to say what is relevant? So she's questioning, you know, who decides that? You know, what makes one critic decide what's better than another critic, or one reader decide what another reader might think is good, one reader might think is bad? We can eliminate A for sure. It doesn't say anything that most people don't read criticism. It doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't really say anything about her realizing his ideas about poetry are now irrelevant. It doesn't say anything about that. So we can eliminate A and B. And then it doesn't really say anything about she realizes that few women today would find Arnold's views engaging. So it really doesn't say any of those three things. We can eliminate those three choices, and it would want, and the correct choice would be C. Makes her wonder who decides what is good. Okay, question 8. Which of the following most nearly paraphrases Helen Hunt Jackson's statement to Emily Dickinson that it is wrong to the day you live in that you will not sing aloud? So again, we're looking at something and we're paraphrasing. What is she really saying in that statement there? And the correct answer there is J. It is unfair to this age that you do not share your poetry with the world. So the day you live in, that basically means the time that you're alive while you're on this earth, you know, your lifetime, the people that are living in your lifetime. It's unfair to them that you don't share your poetry with them. So that's what she's saying in J. She doesn't say anything about it being morally reprehensible not to let others read your work. She doesn't say anything about becoming a singer, and she doesn't say anything about reading out loud to people her poetry and it being stingy and wrong not for her to do that. So we can eliminate the other three. Okay, question 9. Says it may reasonably be inferred that the authors consider Emily Dickinson one of the luckiest great writers who ever lived, in part because D, she lived in isolation, which allowed her much time to write. And she does talk about she didn't have children, she didn't have a husband, you know, she didn't have other people that needed her time. So she could devote her entire time to her poetry. So in that way, the author thinks that she was a very lucky person, a very lucky writer, that she could just devote her life to her writing. And question 10 says, the last paragraph suggests that those who would reevaluate and perhaps want to devalue the work of famous male poets should above all be, and the correct answer there is cautious. She really never says anything about devaluing and reevaluating all male poets. She admits that there are some wonderful male poets, and that really has nothing to do with how many great female poets there are. So she tells people that they should be cautious about just writing off every male poet. She doesn't say they should be decisive, opinionated, or zealous. So cautious is the correct choice there. Okay. So we'll move on to passage 4, if there's no questions on that passage. I think passage 4 is a science passage. So again, a little more like it. Well, this one is not out of a textbook. I think it's out of a newspaper, right? Or a magazine, Newsweek, yep. So you can kind of see that these are, you know, not very difficult reading. It wouldn't be like something that you would read in medical school. The average person probably picks up a Newsweek and looks through it and reads some of the articles. And that's the reading level that we're talking about here. So this one dealt with babies' brains and how they develop. And I found it kind of interesting because I'm about to have another baby myself. So I found it very interesting to read this, but you know, perhaps you don't find science as interesting. Again, all the information is right here in this passage that you will need to read, but it is a little more technical. And they do give you, I wanted to point out in the beginning, they do give you some of the words that you will read in this passage and the definitions. So they tell you about the term neuron, referring to a specialized cell in the nervous system, and tomography, a special method of producing three-dimensional images of internal structures. So if there ever is vocab that you need to know, they will tell you that in the beginning. Like I said, they don't expect you to know all of this information, you know, outside information. Everything is right here. It's a reading test, not a science test. And actually the science portion is more of a reading test too, which we will get to when we talk about that. But it's all here in the passage. So the first question just asked, the main point of this passage is to. So this is one of those main point questions, main idea, main theme. So the main point of this passage is to, and the correct answer there is B. Illustrate the importance of stimulation and experience in the formation of a baby's brain. So it doesn't talk about the importance of genetics. I mean, it does talk about genetics a little bit, but it's not the main idea. It doesn't talk about, for the main idea, the great need for conducting further research on babies' brains, or compare the latest research with similar research 15 years ago. It does bring up some of those things, but that's not the main point. Here we're looking for the main point, and that's stimulation and experience when forming a baby's brain. Question 2 talks about the main point made in the second, third, and fourth paragraphs, so that's quite a bit of the passage, is the structure of the baby's brain, and the correct answer there is J, is still developing after the child is born. So this is still kind of a main idea type question because it's a significant portion of the passage that they're asking about. What is the main point in those paragraphs? And they're talking about how the child's still developing after he or she is born. It doesn't end there. In fact, it really starts to develop after the child's born because of experiences. Question 3. According to the passage, one thing PET allows neurobiologists to do is, and the correct answer there. So this is something straight out of the passage. They're asking you a detail. So according to this passage, what is one thing that a PET allows? And the correct answer is A, observe activity in the frontal cortex of a baby's brain. So that, again, is just straight information right out of the passage that you would look up, what does the PET do? And it tells you these are some things that the doctors can do with that. So the correct answer there is A. Question 4. Okay, so it says, when she compares the baby's brain to city neighborhoods, the author is most nearly illustrating her point that. So this is kind of an inference question. We're looking at, she's kind of making a comparison here, a metaphor, you know, she's comparing it to city neighborhood lights. What is she trying to do here? And the question, or the answer for number 4 is G. The regions of the brain are awakened through experience. So that's why she's making that comparison. It's like a light bulb going off every time they have an experience. That's a new region of the brain that's awakened. And that's why she compares it to city lights. Okay, question 5 asks, which of the following would the author of the passage be least likely to recommend as a way to strengthen the synapses of a baby's brain? So this is a question, least likely. So you're still looking for the best answer, but you're saying, okay, out of all these questions, which one would you most least likely recommend? And the correct answer for 5 is C, teaching a baby with flashcards, because she does say, you know, the parents that, looking for it here, the exact line, where she talks about parents kind of being suckered into getting the flashcards, but that doesn't really help. It's more the old-fashioned peekaboo, playing with blocks, playing with, you know, sorting socks by colors. Those are the things that really allow the baby's brain to develop, not the flashcards. So out of all those things, the thing that she talks about being least likely to recommend as a way of strengthening the baby's brain is playing with flashcards. Question 6. The last paragraph, so now we're going to go down to the end of the passage, suggests that the formation of synapses occurs most rapidly. And she says it starts in the second half of the first year and then goes on for the next 10 years, I think she says. So let's see, very end here. In the second half of the first year, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of the fourth thought and logic, I'm looking at lines 83 through the end, forms synapses at such a rate that it consumes twice as much energy as an adult brain, and it continues for the child's first decade of life. So that would be, she's suggesting that H, from the time the child is 6 months old until he's about 10 years old, that's when most of that occurs. So that's right there. The answer is right there in black and white in the last paragraph. So that's more of a details type question. Okay, question 7 As it is used in line 30, the phrase something innate most nearly means. So this is kind of a vocab question that we talked about, the meaning of the words. So you might think you know what innate means, but we want to make sure we look it up in context to know exactly how they're using it in the passage. And question 7, the answer is D, an inherited trait. So in line 30, she's saying after birth rather than something innate determines the actual wiring of the human brain. So it's after birth, not something they're born with. So that's the definition for something innate as used in this paragraph. Question 8 asks the 5th paragraph suggests that one of the main causes of pruning is, so lines 53 through 70, and the answer there is F, lack of stimulation. So if we look kind of more at lines 57 through 60, I'm going to read. It will fade if it is not accessed from time to time. So the synapses that are not used will also wither away in a process called pruning. The way to reinforce these connections has become known as stimulation. So right there, it's telling you a lack of stimulation is the main cause of pruning. If it's not stimulated, it will kind of wither and die away. Kind of like pruning your plants, I guess, the same term. Question 9 asks when the author refers to entrepreneurs preying on the anxieties of new parents. She's most likely suggesting that new parents should. So this is what we talked about with the flashcards. Stimulation does not mean subjecting a toddler to flashcards. So what is she saying here? The answer is B. They should not be deceived by advertising that claims certain products will increase a baby's intelligence. So basically she's saying these entrepreneurs are trying to get new parents to think they have to do these flashcards because they just want to do what's best for their child and their child's brain development, and that's not what helps. What helps is sorting the socks, doing blocks, playing peekaboo, those old-fashioned things. And question 10. Scroll down real quick. The passage states that in terms of development, the average baby should be able to, and the answer there is line J, form explicit memories at about 9 months of age. So again, this is just a straight details question. It tells you right there in the passage what babies should do at what point. So let's see. Last paragraph, line 80, at 8 or 9 months, the hippocampus becomes fully functional, and now babies can form explicit memories. So it tells you right there exactly what they should be able to do in terms of development. Okay, so that was just a straightforward details question too. So if we don't have any other questions on the reading, we will move on to math and talk a little bit about what to expect on the test, and then we'll do just some basic math skills that you might see. So let me pull this up here. Okay. So the math test, facts about the math test. The math portion of the ACT is made up of 60 questions. You will have 60 minutes to complete this part of the test. This is it's made up of the following types of questions. So 60 minutes, 60 questions. It seems like straightforward. You have a minute to do each problem, but really some math problems will take you less than a minute and some may take you more than a minute. But you always want to remember, like we talked about, you don't want to spend too much time on one question because then you might miss out on some easier questions. And the math is not it does not go from easiest to hardest, so there might be some easier questions at the end. So definitely if you're stuck on a problem, circle it and move on. Or if you have no idea, like we talked about in the beginning of the course, just guess. If you know you're not going to get it at all, just guess, put something down. Don't ever leave it blank on the ACT. But if you think you might be able to figure it out, but you're spending too much time on it, circle it and come back to it. So the nice thing about go. The nice thing about the ACT is that you kind of have an idea ahead of time of what to expect for the math because they put the same amount of types of questions on each test. They're not the same exact questions, obviously, but they will put 24 pre-algebra and elementary algebra questions on the test. So you know that's a big chunk of the test. They will put 18 intermediate algebra and coordinate geometry questions on the test. Coordinate geometry is plotting on graphs. So that's a big chunk too. And then 18 plane geometry, which is the shapes and the formulas that go with them, and trigonometry questions. Now, trigonometry, there's actually only 4 trigonometry questions. They just are kind of lumped together in that category, but if you're not a big fan of trigonometry, you don't have to worry. There's only 4 questions on the ACT that are trig questions. So it kind of helps to know, okay, I'm really good at pre-algebra. Well, that's almost that makes up a big chunk of the test is pre-algebra. So that's kind of nice to know. If you don't like trig, you're in luck. There's only a few trigonometry questions. Okay, you can and should use your calculator for the test. So even though you might be able to do a lot without your calculator, you don't want to ever risk it and go in there. A, because you might make a simple mistake, and B, because it will save you time to use your calculator. And as we've talked about, time is of the essence on the ACT. So you want to make sure you have your calculator, you know how to use it, and that it has fresh batteries. We've talked about that before too. So you don't get there and your battery or your calculator dies. And if it's a new calculator, make sure you know how to use it. And also, again, make sure it's an approved calculator. And if you're not sure, you can go on the ACT website. Also, unlike the SAT, the ACT does not provide any formulas at the beginning of the math portion. The SAT gives you just a few, not a lot, but just a few geometry formulas that you might need to know. The ACT doesn't, but it really doesn't make a difference. Most of the formulas you will know or you'll have gone over in math class before. So that's just one difference between the ACT and the SAT, but like I said, it really doesn't. It won't hurt you to not have those formulas in the beginning. So there are easy, medium, and hard questions on the math test. The basic questions usually have just 1 or 2 steps. So it's just maybe a straightforward solve for x type thing, or a question about which one is a prime number, something like that. A medium question has 2 or 3 steps, and a hard question has more than 3 steps. Again, what you might find hard, somebody else might find easy, but this is just kind of how the ACT looks at a question. If you have to do 4 steps, it's considered a pretty hard question, and also because it will take up some time too. So there's those types of questions scattered throughout the test. So an easy question, straightforward, medium and hard questions might have a few more steps. You want to look out for partial answers on the harder questions. Many times a student will think they have completed a question before it is actually done. The test makers will put these partial answers on the test to trick you, and this is similar to the SAT too. Especially if it's a multiple step problem or a word problem, you really want to make sure you know what the test is asking you or what the question is asking you, because they will anticipate what answer you might put on if you don't do that last step and put it in the answer choices. So you'll say, oh yeah, I got the answer and it's right here. Just make sure you really read the question and make sure you answer what the question is asking you. So you want to make sure you completely answer what the question is asking. And then one way to avoid this is to break down multiple step problems into smaller steps. So just instead of looking at the whole problem at once, do the first step, okay, then go on to the next step, then go on to the next step, and look at it as like maybe 3 small math problems. Another tip is to underline what the question is really asking. When you come up with an answer, go back to what you have underlined and make sure you answer what the question really asked. Okay, math basics. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the math basics that are going to be on, and then next week we'll go into more detail with algebra, geometry, that sort of thing. So these are just some math basics that you probably want to be familiar with before you take the ACT. Real numbers are numbers that we commonly think of when we think of numbers. 10, 1/2, 0.456, the negative 32, etc. They include everything but imaginary numbers, which rarely appear on the ACT. An example of imaginary number would be I, but you really don't see those too often on the ACT. They will be on there once in a while, but not a lot. So it's just good to be familiar with what a real number and imaginary number is. A rational number is any number that can be written as a whole number, a fraction, or a repeating decimal. So whole number, a fraction, or something that repeats, 0.33333. An irrational number cannot be written as an integer over an integer, and it goes on forever, like pi. Integers are numbers that do not include fractions or decimals. So they're numbers on the number line, right? Positive numbers are to the right of 0 on the number line, and negative numbers are to the left of 0. So positive and negative, that should be a review from a long time ago. Remember, positive numbers get bigger the farther they move from 0, and negative numbers get smaller. In other words, negative 3 is bigger than negative 6 because it's moving farther away from 0. The 3 rules to remember when multiplying positive and negative numbers are positive times positive equals positive, positive times negative equals negative, and negative times negative equals positive. So again, that should be review from math a while ago, but good to refresh your memory. Prime numbers can be divided evenly by only 2 numbers, 1 and itself. So 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11 are all prime numbers. The number 2 is the only even prime number, and neither 0 nor 1 is a prime number. So they will ask on occasion, you know, is number 2 a prime number or not? Or they'll give you like a list of numbers and say which one is not prime. So it's good to know that 2 is a prime number even though it's even, and 0 or 1, neither one of those is a prime number. The absolute value of a number is the distance between that number and 0 on the number line. It is always positive and can be expressed like this. So the absolute value of 8 is the 8 between the 2 lines there, and it's always positive. So absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Absolute value of 8 is 8 because it's 8 units from 0 on the number line. A factor of a number is another number that can be divided evenly into a number. So 3 is a factor of 6. A multiple of a number is another number that can be divided evenly by that number. So a multiple of 15 is 30. And a way I like to think of it when you can't remember which one's which, there are always more multiples because 15 can go into a whole lot of numbers. 30, 45, 60, 75, you know, you can go on. But there are less numbers that go into 15, right? 1, 3, 5, and 15. So multiple, there's usually more. An exponent is a short way of writing the value of a number multiplied several times by itself. The lower number is called the base, and the upper number is called the exponent. So a few rules to remember about exponents. When you multiply numbers that have the same base, you add exponents. When you divide numbers with the same base, you subtract the bottom exponent from the top exponent. And when a number is raised to a fractional power, the numerator acts like the real exponent, and the denominator tells you what power radical to make the number. A few more rules to remember about exponents. There's a lot of them. When you raise a power to a power, you simply multiply the exponents. So if it's, you know, 1 in parentheses, if it's 2 to the 3rd power to the 5th power, you would multiply the exponents, 3 and 5. Anything to the 0 power is 1, and anything to the power of 1 is itself. And when several numbers are inside the parentheses, the exponents outside the parentheses must be distributed to all the numbers inside. So if you have 3 to the 2nd power plus 2 to the 3rd power all to the 2nd power, you need to multiply those exponents inside by the exponent outside by 2. Okay. So those are just a few math basics that I wanted to go over today. And again, we will talk more about some algebra, geometry, a little bit of trig over the next 2 courses. So for this week, what I'd like is that you guys do the quiz that will be posted on the website. And then for the practice questions, what we will do is set 1 and set 2. There's 12 questions each. So that's 24 questions. So we'll do the quiz that will be posted on the website, and then we will do set 1 and set 2 for next week, and we'll talk about the answers there. And then we'll go on to some more math information that will be on the ACT. So again, I apologize for the technical difficulties in the beginning of the class, and I appreciate you sticking with me and talking a little bit about math this week. And we will go into more math information the following 2 weeks. And like always, please feel free to email me with any questions you might have and any concerns. I'll check my email, and good luck with the math. I will talk to you next Tuesday. Thank you so much.